Beat generation. It was no easy matter to see Jack Kerouac up in Lowell, Massachusetts. I found that out for myself when I went to visit him early in 1968, not long before the publication of his novel, The Vanity of Dulos, the last in the Lowell cycle. I had tried unsuccessfully to reach him by telephone a couple of times and had been cut off once in mid-question. And yes, I had an address, but not, as it turned out, the right address. Lowell is one of those old mill towns that blight the New England landscape. A depressed area in every way, but one that means the people are unemployed. There seem to be plenty of jobs there. The textile mills are going full blast. Store windows are filled, and there are plenty of shoppers on the street. But what kind of a town is it, really? The kind that people come from, not the kind that they go back to. I drove through residential streets surveying the house that lined them and found that they were well cared for, but there was a dreary sameness to them that bespoke a failure of nerve, a lack of imagination. I was looking for the address I had taken up there with me. It turned out to be the only Kerouac in the Lowell telephone directory, and the name was Herv Kerouac. I found it without too much difficulty, parked the car, and looked the house over. Frame, 19th century from the look of it, but in good shape, and up on a hill above the Merrimack River. I went up the stairs and rang the bell, not too long and not too hard, but politely. The door opened wide, but the figure of a man blocked it completely. It was Herb Kerouac, a working man, dressed in a flannel shirt and twill pants. He stood about 5'6" or 7, weighed perhaps a little over 200 pounds, of which no more than 5 were fat. He smiled very tentatively, listened as I explained why I came to Lowell, but then he said that Jack Kerouac was nowhere around. But he does live in Lowell, doesn't he? Well, yeah, but he doesn't live in this house. He lives a long way from here, and he doesn't want me giving out his address. Too many guys from New York come up here to see him. He doesn't like it. He wants to be left alone, you understand? Are you his brother? No, I'm not his brother. His brother's dead a long time ago. I'm his cousin. Do him a favor. Go away. Herb Kerouac is not the kind of man you want to argue with, it seems.
Herb Kerouac is not the kind of man you argue with. I just nodded politely and left. I went down to the center of town and began asking about Jack Kerouac, first at a drugstore. A kid behind the counter, barely 20, laughed and shrugged when I asked about Kerouac, said he was crazy, and just shook his head when I asked if he knew where he lived. In a corner cigar store, a customer over 40 said sure, he knew Kerouac and gone to high school with him. What's he like, I asked. He's just a guy, just like anybody else, he said. Then added, almost as an afterthought, but he was a pretty good football player, though. Yes, sure, he knew he was a writer and all that, but he didn't know where he lived. He hasn't been in town in a long time, see? He had a pretty good idea where he might be right now, though, and he directed me to Nicky's Bar on Gorham Street. And there was Jack Kerouac when I walked into the place. He was the guy sitting in back, talking across the bar to the bartender. There was no mistaking him. Of course, he looked older than he did 10 years before when they took all those pictures. His hair, what I could see of it under the baseball cap he wore, looked almost as black as it ever did. He was heavier, no doubt about that. Somehow, though, the face was the same. The bartender with whom he was talking so intently turns out to be his brother-in-law, Nick, who owns the bar. Although he looks vaguely tough, he has a good reputation in Lowell, and he is proud of his sister's new husband. How did my sister meet him? He echoes my query later on. How should I know? Listen, this goes back a long way. The two of them, my sister and Jack, they've known each other all their lives. They were high school sweethearts and all that. He's a good husband for her. He takes good care of her. I love him. I stood close by, waiting to be noticed. Eventually, Kerouac threw an arm out in a bit of wild Canuck gesticulation, glanced in my direction and said something like, oh, hey, hi. I nodded politely and told him why I'd come. I asked if he could talk to me for a little while. Sort of an interview, I explained. With that, Kerouac put 2 fingers in his mouth and whistled shrilly. The old heads at the bar turned in our direction, and Nicky, the bartender, walks away. Interview, Kerouac shouts. Interview! New York is here. America is listening. Light laughter, fading to smiles. But they know this routine, and so they are back drinking their beer, talking their old guide talk to one another.
I asked him then if he thought he and his writings had changed much in the last 10 years. He didn't seem to think much of the question. Maybe. For sure, I don't know. Shrug. But then listen, that whole beach scene is dead. If you want my opinion, if anything, my writing is improved because I'm improved. Let me tell you, a true writer should be an observer and not go around being observed like Mahler and Ginsberg. Observing, that's the duty and oath of a writer. Here in Lowell, I just sit around and take in the scene. It's great, but you'll just be able to judge for yourself. My new novel was written right up here. I think it's better than anything I've done for quite a while. Read it, or, read it. You can decide for yourself. I asked him about his politics and told him that some who said they were old friends of his were claiming that he had changed his position recently. He bridled at that. How? How? Listen, my politics haven't changed, and I haven't changed. I'm solidly behind Bill Buckley, if you want to know. Nothing I wrote in my books, nothing can be seen as basically in disagreement with this. Everyone just assumed I thought the way they wanted me to think. What really bothered me a lot, though, was the way a certain cadre of leftists among the so-called beats took over my mantle and twisted my thoughts to suit their own purpose. Just what kind of relationship do you... Hey, he said, looking at me oddly. Aren't you gonna have anything to drink? Hey, Nicky, come on, give this guy something to drink. I ordered and Kerouac called for another glass of wine. It was thick and dark. It looked like port. I was gonna ask you if you thought the hippies came out of the beat movement. He battled this one for a long while and made a number of starts and stops before he really even said anything. For the first time, I really noticed that he was beginning to show his drinking. The hippies bothered him. He didn't want to claim them, but Kerouac persisted, and after a moment's pause in which Nicky put our drinks down in front of us, of course the hippies followed us in certain ways, so yeah. I guess you could say that they are descendants of the Beat Generation. Maybe what separates us from them is not so much age as acid. I tried LSD once, and I couldn't write, and I couldn't paint the way I wanted to while I was having this trip. All I could do was have these visions of heaven. I wrote it all down afterward, but it didn't really seem so great to me by that time. Would you say that? Listen, he interrupted. I don't know if you've thought much about this at all, or maybe you already had your mind made up about me before you even came to talk to me. But anyhow, one thing I wanted to say. I want to make this very clear. Here I am, a guy who was a railroad brakeman, and a cowboy, and a football player. Just a lot of things ordinary guys do. And I wasn't trying to create any kind of new consciousness or anything like that. We didn't have a whole lot of heavy abstract thoughts. We were just a bunch of guys who were out trying to get laid. All right. Yeah, that's what I thought. We were a bunch of guys trying to get laid.
What about all the rest of those guys, though? Do you see them much anymore? What about Allen Ginsberg? Well, Kerouac shrugs, making a play of indifference. You probably heard the story about Allen and what happened when he came up here 6 months ago. He wasn't allowed to come and see me by my mother. I can't say I blame her, though. He scared hell out of her with his beard and his bald head. He bothers me, too. If you ask me, he's sort of an evil format to his program. The poetry racket and the youth racket, the way he is. I meet him on the street in New York and he says, give me your riches. I say to him, what riches? I don't have any riches. I don't. I'm just an ordinary guy who's trying to do his job. My job happens to be that I'm a writer. Is he working on another book then? There's always another book. If I live long enough, I'll write my Hollywood book next. How will I do it? I'll just sit down and let it flow out of me like I did all the rest of them since on the road. It's a spontaneous flow that comes, and nobody could understand what I was talking about when I said you should just open up and let it come out. It's the Holy Ghost that comes through you. You don't have to be a Catholic to know what I mean. You don't have to be a Catholic for the Holy Ghost to speak through you. He had nothing more to say to me after that. He talked a while longer, but he said nothing more.
Kerouac, the Beat Generation.
Bruce Cook, let it flow out of you. Let it come through you.
Thompson Society, Beat Society, come join us.
Yes,
Yeah,
the arts are alive.
We need you back here. We need new readers.
Join us.
DJ, Drum Circle,
Doorstown.
USA, come on down.